It was cold and dark, but the boy did not feel the chill. The snow that fell all around him seemed to glow with a soft blue light illuminating the forest. The fir trees stretched high above his head toward the stars. In the distance, he thought he could see a faint glow through the trees, and he decided to walk toward it. The night air was deliciously fresh, and the forest was quiet save the sound of his feet crunching pleasantly over pine needles and cones. A light wind rippled through the snowy boughs above him, and in it he swore he heard someone sigh his name, Simon. He pulled his scarf close around his throat, thankful that he had thought to bring it. His mother had knit it for him just the week prior. She had embroidered green leaves with red berries at the borders, and it lent the garment a festive feel. Simon had not been walking long when he came upon a tree shaped unlike the rest in the conifer wood. Broad and thick, with massive branches that seemed to reach out to encircle the very path he had been cutting toward that faint golden light. One of the massive branches seemed to grow even larger, reaching toward the sky like the arms of a giant, reaching up to touch the stars. He gasped when he noticed the tree slowly growing shoot by shoot new branches that grew not up, but down toward where he stood. He took a step back, but then saw a familiar golden glow at the top of the branch. It held the same warmth as the light he had been following through the woods. Closer the branch grew, and closer still, till it seemed to point a spindly wooden finger at the boy's chest. At the end of the branch hung a golden bauble. He reached out to touch it, but the branch drew back. The boy hesitated, and then slowly put out his upturned palm. The bauble dropped lightly into his hand, and he inspected it immediately. Turning it around, he recognized the shape as that of an acorn made of gold. It was warm in his palm. He looked back up at the tree, at its arm-like bough. The branch slowly began to curve until it pointed in the direction of the golden glow, still visible in the distance. The boy nodded. He placed a palm on the giant oak tree, and before he could think to question the act, thanked it for its gift. As he continued on his way, Simon held the acorn in his hand, marveling at the way it seemed to heat not only his hand, but his entire body. He had never seen anything like it, and somehow he knew that he needed to bring it to the light at the end of the woods. Soon he came upon a collection of holly bushes, their glossy green leaves dusted with snow and bright red berries. The fruit looked enticing, but Simon knew better than to eat it. His grandmother had once caught him picking chokeberries for their gorgeous purple skins, and she had slapped them out of his hand so quickly he hadn't even had a moment to cry. They were poisonous to humans, she told him, especially to small children, and they were best left to the birds. As if summoned by the recollection of this event, a raven landed at Simon's feet. It stared at him head cocked, and then flew to one of the branches that seemed to Simon indistinguishable from the rest. The dark bird disappeared into the branches, and then surfaced with a berry that seemed redder than the rest in its beak. It hopped from the bush, and stood before Simon, beak outstretched. He knelt and put out his palm, as he had for the oak tree. The bird approached slowly, and dropped the berry into Simon's hand. Simon drew the berry close to his face, and as he did, it began to glow, and within its center he thought he could almost make out small bursts of light exploding like minuscule fireworks. He bent his head to the raven and stood, ready to follow the light at the end of the woods once more. When he looked up, the light seemed much closer than it had been before. He turned to look back the way he came, and the oak tree, the holly bush, they were nowhere in sight. He turned back toward the yellow light and broke into a run. The raven flew overhead as if to guide him. He ran and he ran until he reached the source of his guiding light. It was a campfire, he realized, surrounded by logs, and on one of those logs sat a man in a wool and fur cloak with a hood that covered most of his face. From what Simon could see, the man was much larger than anyone he had ever met before. He took a few cautious steps toward the man, but he wasn't afraid. He felt the berry and the acorn become warmer and warmer in his palm. He looked down at them, and then looked up at the stranger. "Do you have anything for me, boy?" the hooded figure asked in a voice that was at once ancient and ageless. Simon swallowed and nodded. "Yes, sir," he managed to say. He held out the berry and the acorn. "Into the fire," the man said gruffly. Simon approached the fire and reluctantly tossed his beautiful gifts into the blaze. As he watched, the berry began to glow brighter and brighter until it burst into brilliant red flames. The acorn began to spin in the fire, faster and faster, until it too exploded, this time into a flare of gold that seemed to continue to spin and spin. The two flames began to twine together, weaving round and round each other until it became a big ball of fire, shooting gold, orange, and yellow sparks into the dark sky. It spun around in circles, creating a beautiful, colorful spiral. Slowly, the ball of fire began to fade, leaving nothing behind, as if it were never there at all.
At that moment, the great raven flapped through the darkness. He felt sadness fill his heart like a black rain cloud as dark as the night itself. He knelt on the damp grass, feeling the cold, crumpling leaves with his weak, trembling hands. He looked up at the sky and took a deep breath, filling his lungs with fresh air as if summoning strength from the gods. "Fear not," he heard a soft whisper whistle through the trees. "For you are not alone." He searched in the darkness looking for whence the voice came. He saw nothing. He heard the voice again, but this time it was closer to him. He couldn't clearly understand what the voice was saying now. He tried harder, summoning all his strength to decipher those words and sounds. The voice grew louder and stronger. Simon awoke with a start, realizing the voice he had heard was coming from outside. Children were playing in the park across the street. He sat up in his bed, not wanting to leave the forest in his dream, but it was too late. Pieces of the dream were already fading into his subconscious like wispy trails of smoke. He felt an immediate sadness as he struggled to remember the dream, and instead remembering what his older cousin, Megan, had told him. The words "into the fire" echoed in the far reaches of his brain over and over, like some ominous portent. But then her words invaded the space inside his mind. "Mary St. Nicholas isn't real." How dare she? It could not possibly be true, but sadly the words had already seeped in and begun to do their worst to his 7-year-old psyche. He tried to erase them by vigorously shaking his head from side to side. It was a cruel thing to tell him, with Yule just 2 days away and presents piling up under their Yule tree as they always did that time of year. Where are all they coming from if not from Mary St. Nicholas? He wondered. It was truly disturbing him. He rolled his little frame out of bed, going promptly to the window. It was snowing. He watched the crystallized water coming down in torrents from the gray skies. His sad green eyes fell on the tiny figurine sitting upon the windowsill, and with his tiny trembling fingers he lightly traced the rosy smiling cheeks and the fluff of white beard, and he whispered, "You do exist, don't you?" In the silence, he listened hard for a response, but none came, and he sighed. What did you think was going to happen? He thought to himself. Well, he could not simply accept this. He would not simply accept it. He would get to the bottom of it, and fast, because it would not do to just let this sit and simmer and spoil. As quickly as he could, he got himself dressed. His mother was where he knew she would be, bustling about in the kitchen, preparing all the special, delicious dishes he loved. "Ah, there you are, darling. Would you like something to eat?" she asked him as soon as she saw him. He marched over to the seat she had pulled out for him and plopped himself down. "Yes, please, Mummy," he said politely, resting his chin in his hand. He watched her with interested eyes as she made him a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast she had already cooked, and she set it down in front of him. "Enjoy it, my love," she said tenderly. For a moment, he almost forgot his woes as he picked up his fork and started to shovel scrambled cheesy eggs into his hole of a mouth. He loved his mother's cooking so much. Simon didn't know what he would do if she ever stopped cooking for him. Now, why did he have that thought? He frowned at himself for thinking it, growing even more angry with his stupid cousin. It was her fault, he thought it, something he had never before now ever considered. His mother's voice penetrated his thoughts. "What's the matter, darling? Don't you like the eggs?" she asked. He looked at his mother's kind, pretty face, her large green eyes, same as his, gazing upon him with concern. "Mommy," he began with a deep breath, "is Grandma coming for Yule?" He was referring to her mother. His father's mother was Nana. Grandma always had the answer, it seemed.
He chewed his food, furrowing his brow in thought. "Simon," his mother prompted when he did not reply. "Mummy, can we call Grandma? I need to ask her something." "Oh, of course, darling. What do you need to ask her? Did you think of something else you wanted for Yule?" Simon stopped chewing. His mouth gaped open. "Huh?" he blurted. The moment froze in time as realization dawned on his mother. "Oh gods, what did I just do?" Her expression was shocked. Simon went to say something, but she cut him off quickly. "Of course, darling. Eat up. We'll call Grandma after breakfast." She turned back to her stove, looking for something to do, stalling herself for the fallout. But it never came. Her little boy continued to eat his breakfast, and the silence of it formed a rock in the pit of her stomach. She was glad he wanted to speak to Grandma. She would know how best to handle it. A short time later, Simon heard his grandma's voice through the telephone. "Hello, Simon. Your mummy said you wanted to speak to me. Are you well?" Simon melted at the sound of Grandma's warmth, like a chocolate chip cookie baking in the oven. He got right to the point. "Grandma, I have to ask you something. Is Mary St. Nicholas real?" He related what Cousin Megan had said, and then what his mummy had said at breakfast, and he attempted to conjure up as much of the dream as he could recall in that moment, although he wasn't sure it was much now in the light of day. Grandma listened patiently, and then when he was done, she said, "My smart little boy, what a beautiful dream, and it is a wonderful question you ask. I'm very happy you asked." She paused, it seemed, for a long time, and Simon opened his mouth to prompt her to speak, but before he could say anything, Grandma said, "I will give you my answer to your very wonderful question on Yule morning. In the meantime, I want you to do something." Simon's curiosity piqued. "What do you want me to do, Grandma?" he asked, almost forgetting his own query. "I want you to go to the window before you get into bed tonight, look up at the sky and find the brightest star. When you find that star, I want you to gaze at it for a long moment, then close your eyes and make a wish. And remember, don't tell anyone what your wish is. Can you do that, Simon?" "Yes, Grandma, I will," he promised. "Good. I love you very much, Simon. I will see you soon." "I love you too, Grandma. See you soon." That night, after supper, Simon had a bath and prepared for bed. Once he was in his pajamas and he was sure he would not be disturbed, he went over to his bedroom window and followed his grandmother's guidance. He gazed up for as long as he could, and he closed his eyes. Then he made his wish. As he opened his eyes, a gentle knock rapped outside his bedroom door. As he turned, he saw a tall figure enter his room. His heart thumped inside his little chest. His eyes grew wide like two saucers. There, in his room, in the middle of the floor, with his head almost touching the ceiling, stood the ancient man in the wool and fur cloak. The man's hood no longer covered his face, and Simon could see clear as the sun rising on Yule morn who he was. On his shoulder, the raven perched and observed Simon with great interest. Simon remembered the man and the raven from his dream. In the light of Simon's room, the man appeared less intimidating, but still every bit ageless and ancient, and there was a familiar twinkle in the man's eyes. They both stood staring at one another for a moment, until the man's face broke into a cheery smile beneath his tufts of white beard, and he said in that deep, resonant, jolly voice,
"Hello, Simon."
Then his hands unfurled from out of the cloak. There, in the palm of his hand, he held the berry and the acorn.
"These are yours,"
said the old man.
"Merry Saint Nicholas is real, and for those who believe in him, he brings many blessings."
In that moment, Simon knew his wish come true.